Hi, boys and girls. It's time for our story again. Our story today is called A Faithful Friend. Ellen was looking at her husband, Bert. Where do you suppose he could be? Where could Sammy have gone? Bert, he looked at his wife and he said, Honey, I don't know. I know you miss him, but he's been gone 6 days. Now, Sammy was their little puppy, and he had just disappeared. There seemed no way of knowing where he might have gone. Well, Bert, he reached out his hand and he patted his wife's, and he said, Honey, I think after this long, there's no hope. Well, Bert knew that in Africa, which is where they were, any pet that disappeared for a whole week or almost a whole week was surely eaten by a wild animal or had gotten caught in one of the natives' traps. He said, You've just got to let it go, sweetheart. I'm sorry. Well, Bert, he knew that his wife got lonely. They lived in a construction camp right in the middle of Africa, and there were no other young people for her to be friends with, and the puppy seemed like such a good idea. But now the puppy was gone, and Bert turned to his wife. He said, Ellen, at least you still have Blackie. Well, yes, she still had Blackie. Blackie was a crow that Bert had found, and the crow had a broken wing, and Bert had taken him in and had been kind to him until that wing had healed. Well, now Bert had adopted them as family, and while they were talking about him, he fluttered up to the windowsill and sat down, and it was like he knew that his two masters were talking about him, and he went, caw, caw, caw. He always had something to say. Then he got up and he flew across the room directly into the kitchen where there was a little bowl that was sitting on the counter, and they always put his food in it. Now, Blackie, he liked to eat people food. He liked bread and pieces of meat and all sorts of other things. And Bert, he was watching him. He said, What's wrong with him? Blackie had pecked in his dish at his food, and he'd kind of moved it around. He'd looked at it, you know how birds look with one eye at things, and he picked out the biggest piece of bread in that bowl. He picked it up in his beak, and he flew right back out the window. And Bert said, Where's he going? Ellen said, I don't know. He's been doing that lately. Maybe he has a nest somewhere. Or maybe he has a hidey hole. I'd never heard of that word, a hidey hole. Well, that was a little hole in the side of a tree where a bird could stick things. But Ellen said, I don't think so. You know, I don't know. And Bert said, Well, I don't think so at all, because, crows and magpies and things like that, they like to steal shiny things, and they hide them in hidey holes, but not food. Well, that evening, Bert said, "Hey, let's feed Blackie and then follow him. I want to know where he's taking the food." So that evening, while they were eating dinner, sure enough, here came Blackie, came flying in the kitchen, sat down by his little dish of food, and they watched him as he took his one eye and he looked down and he looked around inside that bowl. And with his beak, he picked out the choicest piece of meat and he started to fly. Well, then he came back. And there again, he took his eye and he looked. Oh, he looked. Which piece should he take this time? When he got up out of his bowl and flew out the window, Ellen and Bert were right behind him. But he didn't fly fast. He generally did, but today it was almost like he wanted them to follow him. So away he went. Bert ran along with Ellen right behind. She hadn't really said anything on this chase because she had to keep her breath. Well, finally, they came to a little ravine, and Blackie turned around and looked at them, still had that piece of meat in his mouth, and he flew down into that ravine right into a big pile of bushes. And he disappeared inside. And Bert said, "What could it be? Why would he be hiding food in there?" Then they heard something. A whimper. A whimper. It couldn't be Blackie. Crows don't whimper. They just caw. Caw, caw, caw. Well, they didn't hear Blackie, but Bert started pushing his way through those branches in that big pile of bushes. And on the other side of it, there was a small clearing. And what Bert saw amazed him. There was Sammy, their little puppy. And he was, oh, he was so excited to see them. He was wiggling and he was making little welcoming noises. And Ellen came rushing up and she went, "Oh no, he can't get up." And they looked on the other side of little Sammy, and Sammy's foot was caught tightly inside of a trap that some man had set to catch wild animals. But Sammy wasn't a wild animal. Well, Bert, he bent down and he very carefully pried open that trap. And he picked up little Sammy. Sammy wasn't very big. And he picked him up and he gave him to Ellen. And Ellen, oh, she cuddled him and loved on him. Oh, she was so glad to have Sammy back. And then Bert said, "You know, 6 days without any food. He should have been skinny and probably dead by now, but the little puppy was still round and roly-poly." And then they looked down at Blackie, and Blackie had set down that piece of meat, and he was standing there so proudly. Well, Bert, he stuck out his arm, and Blackie went flap, 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 and landed on his arm and sat there. And he looked at Bert, and he went, and Bert said, I think he's saying, "Aren't I smart?" Well, they loved the two creatures that God had given him, the crow and little Sammy. And when they were on their way back, they were going to have to treat little Sammy's leg, but it wasn't real bad. He said, I've read that crows sometimes have unusual friends, and we knew that Sammy and Blackie were the best of friends until Sammy disappeared. And where he had been reading about crows being best of friends also said that they could be very courageous and be very loyal friends. Well, obviously, Blackie the Crow had been very, very friendly and helpful to little Sammy. Sammy would have died if it wasn't for Blackie thinking enough to be able to bring him food several times a day, which kept him alive. Boys and girls, God gives the animals instincts and makes them be loving and kind. And He wants us to be courageous and loyal friends to our people friends as well. The next time you're with your friends, watch what you say to them, watch how you treat them, and be willing to be a loyal, helpful friend to them. That's what God wants us to be. I'll see you next week, boys and girls. Bye-bye now. I hope you're having a happy summer. Bye-bye.